You know, I've got a bad habit of automating everything. Like, you're going to laugh when you see how this works, but it worked, sadly. And sort of realized, oh, like visual programming, I've done this before. This sort of makes sense. Actually, that's what used to come up in YouTube when you used to look for my channel. It used to be BIM Guru. It was just underwear ads. I mean, the package manager in Dynamo is a bit of a graveyard these days. There's so many old abandoned packages. It's a bit sad.
Then I was like, whoa, I need to learn that.
It still is one of my favorite things in pyRevit, just the amount of control flow that Python and written programming gives you. I'm definitely Aussie and I'm representing Australia, so that's the Aussie part. I see the excitement about AI is a reflection of how frustrated everyone is with the state of technology in our industry.
They have to give us the clear instructions what they want. And then their second one, like, okay, actually we're safe. They never do that.
But I mean, at the end of the day, programming should be a personal journey for anyone.
All right, guys. Today I have a very exciting guest today on the show. You already know him. His name is Gavin, or you also might know him as Aussie BIM Guru. Good day, mate. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks, mate. Really great to be on the show and finally sort of get to catch up again. I've been watching what you do with a lot of interest, and I can see you're very passionate about similar things to me, so I really look forward to sharing our knowledge and our experiences and also sharing it with your audience. So thanks for having me on board.
Yeah, sure, man. Likewise. I gotta say that when I was starting with YouTube, I was looking to your channel nonstop, like just to kind of validate my idea. Because in the beginning, I thought like, okay, there's not enough tutorials on pyRevit, and it was before you started sharing about pyRevit. I thought like, okay, maybe I should share it, but I was always having this like, is anybody gonna watch this? But then I look at your content because you cover Dynamo, Python, so I saw that we are kind of aligned in this case. It gave me a huge motivation boost to kind of start. So thanks for that as well, and all the content you share as well.
Oh, you're welcome. I mean, one of the main reasons that I guess I made my channel was I wanted to see more people get passionate in sharing and teaching. So it means a lot to know that people see my content and take inspiration from what I've done. And it's a very humble little channel. Like I never really aimed to get a big following. And I guess comparing to other industries, it's a small following, but for architecture, it's probably a pretty decent one. But yeah, I just wanted to pass it on. Yeah.
That's a big one because we're such a niche topic. It's not just architecture or BIM, it's like BIM, Revit, and then you go even in more specifics like Dynamo, all this stuff. No, you have a huge following for sure. All right, I thought that I want to ask you, like, why Aussie BIM Guru? How did you end up with that? What was your like process when you were coming up with the name?
It's a good question. So I guess in the Australian market, BIM is known, but at the time, I guess there weren't really any people that were really publicly representing it in a domain like YouTube. There was people like the Revit Kid and Revit Pure, BIM Pure now, but there wasn't really anyone that I was aware of that was getting out there in the same capacity. So I thought, well, I'm definitely Aussie and I'm representing Australia, so that's the Aussie part. BIM was an interesting one. I thought about doing something besides BIM because I always knew BIM has a shelf life, right? It's not going to be the way we do things forever, like CAD, and there's AI, there's all sorts of ways of approaching these problems that we look at. So, but I decided at the time BIM was very much what I was doing. So I thought, well, it's going to last a little while, hopefully, and if I need to rebrand later, it's okay. And then I guess Guru was just a fun word. I knew that even before I went to YouTube, I was on LinkedIn quite a lot, and I had a lot of interactions with people from overseas, and particularly, mentored a lot of people from India where BIM was really just taking off, and I knew that that was a word that would probably resonate with them, sort of like a spiritual guide, mentor. And whilst BIM's not a religion per se, I like the idea of the wise teacher who is really just there to guide you in life. And I saw a similar opportunity in my channel for guiding people through the industry and some of those more difficult skill sets that, were hard for me to learn initially. So I wanted to sort of make an easier journey for them. So it's sort of, Aussie BIM Guru sort of landed. And I built my logo in Revit using field regions, which is yeah. And then I just sort of started sitting in front of a camera, and eventually people sort of liked what I was doing. I used to get 5 views on a video. One of them was my mum. So I started small for a long time. I think I got 1,000 subscribers after a year and a half. So it takes a while for it to kick off, as you probably experience too.
It's kind of exponential growth.
Yeah, but you've definitely come a long way with your channel and your brand as well. Like I remember downloading your pyRevit toolbar and sort of saying, Eric Fritz, who's this? And then sort of started noticing you in the socials, and you've really sort of made a name for yourself too, which is great. So Yeah, well done.
Yeah, I found it really exciting. It started by accident. I mean, like at first I thought like I'm gonna make some tutorials on this and that, and then more questions come in, and I just enjoyed the process. This is the big thing that if I would hate the process, I would give up. But I kind of enjoyed like making the videos, sharing it, and then further along, just more things came along. Actually, in the beginning, I was considering calling myself something like BIM Buddy. I was this close to make it, but then I decided, what if I Google it? Apparently, somewhere in Korea or in Asia, there is a big Korean group called BIM, and they have a popular song Buddy. And I saw that as a competition. I was like, okay, if anybody would ever kind of Google Beam Body, there's going to be this song with millions of views. It's pointless to like, no, I gave up on that. And I'm very glad Eric Fritz I'm much happier with this than any other things.
Personal brands are very powerful, and I definitely encourage other people to like consider them because your name becomes your search. It does make you very accessible, of course. Suddenly, anyone can find you, right? But you become more than your name in principle. I was actually having a laugh because on the note of finding the wrong thing, when I first started doing YouTube, there's an underwear brand in Australia called Aussie BIM Guru, and actually that's what used to come up in YouTube when you used to look for my channel. It used to be Bum Guru. It was just underwear ads. It was a very interesting search outcome. But luckily I've beat them in the SEO now. They don't show up anymore. So
now everybody looking for their stuff and finding you. They're like, what the hell is BIM?
it's like, this isn't what I want. I want underwear.
I see. That's funny. All right. Listen, there are so many topics, but I like to start with the kind of the beginning of the programming journey of the guests. So could you tell us just to the beginning, to your first hello world statement? Also, what language was it? Just let's go there and kind of continue down this path.
Yeah, so I guess I sort of broke my programming journey down once and realized that I was sort of programming before I knew I was. So I used to hack Super Nintendo ROMs back in the day for fun, which involved breaking into the memory of the ROMs and changing addresses and memory and moving pointers around and doing things like taking doors and pointing them to different rooms to start rearranging maps. And I got really into this game called Super Metroid, which is one of my favorite Super Nintendo games. And we effectively more or less rewrote the game from the inside out, and a lot of people since then have started making new assets in these old 32-bit ROMs. And I guess at the time it didn't really click, but I was sort of programming already. I was looking at pointers and memory and very like heavy programming concepts, but I was just having so much fun I didn't think about the fact that I was programming. Yeah.
How old were you?
So I'm 35. That would have been when I was probably about 15. I was doing that. Yeah, so there was like a
So
few.
you started with hacking.
Yeah, there was a few middle ground programs that other people built to help. So there was like an address viewer where you could look at the raw hex codes that built the ROM, and there was a tile editor that sort of built the world map for you. So some of it was visual, some of it was using pointers and memory addresses. But I guess the second experience I had was about 2 years later. I think I was just about to finish high school, and I really enjoyed a game called Warcraft 3. Back in the day, and it had a really good map editor built into it where you could build custom campaigns, and it had a thing called a trigger editor where you could program events to trigger on certain scenarios with conditions for actions to happen. And it was a very simple concept, but you could go a long way with it. There was for loops and sort of things that Python does naturally, but built for video gaming. So that was sort of where I began. But I sort of took a break from there and didn't really connect programming to my career for quite a while. I found Dynamo in, I think that would have been about 2014. I think I started playing with Dynamo, and it was just a huge gap where I just didn't really do programming for recreation or for work for a very long time. And then sort of realized, like visual programming, I've done this before. This sort of makes sense, and sort of really found a new passion for BIM and using Revit again, which I'd got quite bored of doing manually by that point. So I'd been using Revit for about 4 years, and using Revit manually with no automation. You've probably been there before too, right? It's not fun. Creating a sheet, renaming a sheet, all those steps that just take so much time.
When people discover Dynamo, they always have this kind of second kind of breath. They start hating kind of Revit so much, and then finally they find something new, something exciting, especially all this opportunity to automate. This is also for me, when I discovered at first, I was like, this looks dumb. Then I started using it. I'm like, okay, I'm only going to use this now. Forget about all the rest.
It's the only way. I mean, I've got a bad habit of automating everything, even if it probably doesn't need to be automated, just because I know it's still going to be faster than doing it manually. So sometimes people freak out if they're like, they want to do a task for 2 hours, and I'm like, I'll build you a script. It'll take you an hour to build the script, and it'll take you 20 minutes to run the whole process instead of doing it for 2 hours. And I'm like, so for about an hour and 20 minutes, they're holding their breath, just praying that what I'm building them is actually going to work. But it's part of the fun, I guess.
That's a great way to learn as well. I was on the same journey. Everything, I had to automate everything. The simplest task, I just had to do it with the code. And that what helped me learn it a lot faster.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess whilst I used Dynamo, I was aware of like, C# and also pyRevit at the time, and sort of just found my way into those like extra layers of programming as I went, and just sort of became less abstract in how I approached programming over time, which is probably what you found as well. Did you begin with Dynamo, or did you go straight through the Python pathway?
Yeah. I began with Dynamo, but I was very quick to jump on the kind of Python wagon, because the way I started is I started watching some tutorials here and there. And then we had this project in the office where we had to make this computational design of the facade design. There are like lots of panels, and they had to follow the curves.
Right.
And it was clear that we had to use Dynamo, but nobody in the office knew Dynamo. And I just started watching a few tutorials not long ago. I haven't done anything useful yet. It was just kind of following tutorials. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of started with this massive project in Dynamo. Somehow I made it. I still have no idea how. And along the way, there was one node that was really, really problematic. It was taking like 40 minutes to run. And I thought, well, placing 15,000 panels sounds logical. 40 minutes is much faster than I would do manually. So I was happy. Then I noticed one node was so inefficient. I couldn't replace it with anything. I tried many things. And I was so desperate. Eventually, I ended up seeing, there's a Python node. But I had no idea how to code anything. Again, I went to forums, copy-pasted a bunch of stuff back and forth. It wasn't something complicated. It was something about list management. Mm-hmm. So it was like fine for beginner to kind of figure out. Yep. Made my horrible code, and I saw like instantly, like instead of 40 minutes, it took 40 seconds. Then I was like, whoa, I need to learn that. That's something cool.
Yeah, I definitely had those moments. I literally, sadly enough, actually stood up in my chair in the office and put my fists up when I first developed my first script that actually worked, and everyone just looked over and said, whoa, what just happened? And I'm like, I think I just figured out the way I'm going to work for a very long time. I just suddenly, it clicked all of a sudden. I was like, wait a second, like there's a lot more things I can do now because of this. Once I understood list management, that was one that really made me frustrated when I first learnt programming in Dynamo, because I'd never really used lists as a concept. When I used to program in Warcraft, like you had for loops, but you thought about them as groups of units instead. So you were usually dealing with like battalions instead of lists, and I just abstractly didn't connect the logic of what I'd done before. And I guess visual programming lists are quite different to like iteration in written programming, so it was hard for me to connect to that. Yeah.
You mentioned that when you made your first kind of Dynamo script, you were really exciting. Could you just explain what was the script? What did it do, or what kind of problem did you solve with it?
Yeah, I took on a really classic problem, which was automatically numbering doors based on rooms they were pointing to and from. But I took it a few steps further in that I had to figure out when a door belonged to a room, even though it swung the other way. So I tried to automate that condition. So I ended up having to build a relationship system where rooms knew they were more important than other rooms, so they owned the door. In the event that they had the same level of importance as each other, they went the direction the door swung. But like I made corridors really like unimportant. They were low in the system, so if a door swung out into a corridor, it generally belonged to the room. Then once I'd wrapped them all up in groups by room, I had to then number them in a circle. So I tried to figure out how to sort them, generate circles by best point through the points that were generated per room, and number them from like the top vector and sort of spin around and pick up all the points. So it was a pretty complicated first script. I did really challenge myself to begin with, and it was an awful script. Like I looked back at it and went, oh my god, like this could be 30 nodes maybe, but it was something like 350 I think at the time. And I didn't know how to do things like index in shorthand, so there's a lot of get item at index, put them all back together. So I was sort of breaking lists apart and putting them back together, and It was very
Yeah.
inefficient, but through that inefficiency, I guess I learned along the way different ways you could do things. And one really good thing I did, which I recommend anyone does, is I engaged with the forums like really early. So I used Dynamo forums from almost the start, because that was a tip someone gave me. They said don't neglect the forums. Make sure
Hmm.
you don't just sit staring at a screen getting frustrated, because you won't make it if you don't have the support generally in a new language. So, but, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good advice. I wish I followed that one. I avoided forums.
Yeah.
Every time I would go in a forum, I would write out all my problem in details and so on, and then I would hesitate to send it
Yeah.
because I already made the brainstorming, and I was like, okay, I'm halfway through the brainstorming. I might just continue, kind of, and I switched to Google and continue. And I was very stubborn learner. I could have learned so much faster if I would just ask. Like, hey guys, how do I do this? Somebody would definitely explain me. It's easy.
But even in that case, the forums become this, right? They become the rubber duck. So by explaining your problem to the forum, you think about your problem, and you might find your own solution, even if you don't send the thread. So you can sort of use it like a duck debugger, if you have to. I guess that's the fun part of using forums. Yeah.
No, forums very useful. I just always I don't know why. Maybe it's some kind of ego, or I just didn't want it to like kind of look like absolute beginner, even though I absolutely was.
Oh yeah.
I don't
I
know.
know
There's
that
something
feeling.
that always stopped me. I always like to find solution myself. I don't know, kind of journey to
Yeah,
solve
yeah.
your own problem.
Ego's a hard one in programming, right? I mean, you've got to be vulnerable here and there and know when you're out of your depth and know when you might be wrong with a choice you've made and have to refactor bad code that you produced a year ago. Like, I have to do that all the time where I work. Like, I go back and go, whoa, like, I really took a long way around here. I've got to go back and fix this. So I think being vulnerable and humble is often one of the first traits I say you need in programming, because you're not always going to be right, and someone's going to know more than you at some point, and it's better to get a good exchange out of that. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think that was the issue because I constantly rewrite my code. I'm
yeah,
never happy with my code. I can spend like days rewriting the code, and then I'm gonna look at it. I'm like, I should have done it better. But I also talked with Eshan about this. He says like, it never goes away.
yeah,
It's just kind of thing. It's just the iterative design kind of approach.
totally.
Because in architecture, we kind of change designs all the time, and we are comfortable with that. This is what Eshan also shared, that he thinks that what he learned from architecture kind of applies to programming as well, because he's very free to kind of rewrite code over and over and over. And yeah, I think that's also very helpful because that's how you also learn.
Yep.
Something in kind of when you rewrite, you also change something. It makes better or worse, and you learn.
And I think learning, we learn to be more abstract over time, where it works better. I found that as I go back to my code, I introduce more abstractions to simplify how someone would read my code. Whereas the first time I usually write my code, it's very raw, dirty, like lots of comments all over the place because I wouldn't remember what I was doing at the time. Then I come back and break things down into custom classes and interfaces and things that help me code better in time. So I find that's part of the iterative process as well. It's like refining our craft, if anything, as a programmer is so important, to make sure that we're always just improving on ourselves, as well as just learning new things as well.
Yeah, refactoring is definitely important. I also advise to anybody that when they start, they have to get to the end goal as soon as possible. Doesn't matter how your code looks, doesn't matter how unoptimized it. It's just like you have to go from A to B, at least kind of get there. Just to kind of like a proof of concept, and then you can start optimizing, make it shiny. Because I also fallen into this trap where I spent days just on the first steps just to realize that I cannot reach the end because it just went too advanced because I had the bad idea from the beginning, and I spent in the beginning so much time for nothing.
Yeah,
So yeah, it definitely helped to just kind of go dirty and quick through everything at once.
One really valuable thing the CS50 course taught me was Pseudo-Code, which is where you just basically write out your code in steps, but you don't actually write the code. You're almost just breaking your process down step by step, and that helps you make sure that you're probably going to get to the end of your problem or figure out where there's unknown areas that you need to solve first before you go and do the really, the stuff is going to work. I found that's really helped me, in especially C#, where I realized I'm going to need a class or I'm going to need something that I have to build before I even bother doing this in the first place, because I don't even have like the objects that I'm going to need to enable like a form to work or something like that. I found that the pseudocode approach was really valuable. So I use that in nearly every tool these days. Like if I'm planning out a set of tools, I'll write the whole thing as pseudocode and then sort of start filling the gaps. And the other thing that I found was really good about pseudocode is you start to recognize where you can use functions and methods in multiple places. So if you spend enough time thinking about the shape of your toolkit, you don't have to, write out the same thing 6 times. You can start to find those common steps that you're taking in different tools that don't seem connected at first. But once you sort of lay them all out, you go, wait a second, I've done this over here and here and here. And it starts to build sort of the classes and all those methods you're going to need to run them. Yeah.
I like to do it on paper, like a wireframe. I just write the steps. And the way I do this, I just rewrite over and over and over from scratch. It might be already like complete, but I still rewrite it. This is just my thinking process, because when I rewrite, I come up with this kind of middle steps, like, I might have an issue between step 1 and step 2.
Yeah, I like to compare it to rock climbing. So when rock climbers begin, before their ascent, they just stare at the mountain for the first 20 minutes and find their path before they even start. So it's important to just survey what you need before you jump right in, because once you're in, right? You're locked in. You're not getting out until you finish that thing. So better to know how long you're in there for, as well, especially in a professional setting where you have to deliver code for a company with a timeline or a deadline. It's hard if you jump in blind, and 2 minutes could become 3 hours, could become 2 weeks, could become a whole year. So it's a hard one.
There's a very big quote from, I think it's from Abraham Lincoln, that if he was given 6 hours to chop down a tree, he would spend the first 4 sharpening the axe.
Yep.
It's all about this kind of preparation, thinking ahead, and it really helps. Yeah. Many people neglect it, but that they regret later on for sure.
It's a fantastic quote.
All right, so let's get back a little bit to programming. So you started with Dynamo, you started making your tools. How did you end up with Python? Like, did you use Dynamo a lot before you started playing with Python, or?
Yeah. I used it quite a lot, actually, probably too long. I've always had a habit of staying too long in something I'm comfortable with before I sort of jump out to what I see as like the next step or the next iteration of my programming journey. And I spent about 2.5 to 3 years just using nodes and custom packages by other people before I really said I need to go further. There's something missing here, or I've got too much dependency. That's actually what got me into Python. It was just having too much dependency on packages. And the trigger for it was actually my YouTube channel. So I realized eventually that doing tutorials where you use other people's packages is actually quite tricky because they change. So as a result, your videos don't age too well sometimes. Like the node might get deprecated, or it might change entirely. And some of my videos, half the comments are just, I tried this and nothing happened. And it's like, that node doesn't work that way anymore. Someone's completely changed its behavior, but people are just plugging in wires and not understanding what's going on. So they just run it and it fails, and better make a comment. So that sort of got me into at least trying to reduce my dependency where it wasn't necessary. So like if a package was like 3 years old in Dynamo, I was like, okay, I'd better get rid of this and figure out which things I actually need from it, and then learn how to write this myself. And eventually it got me to the point where I wanted to build my own package, because there was a lot of things that weren't in any of the packages that I saw, lots of utility. And I just said, I'm just going to wrap it all up. Some of the things I've built, other people have, but I built it my way, or I've just built upon ideas that I've seen and said, I think that it can be a bit more robust or a bit different. And that led to what I call Crumple, my Dynamo package. And a big part of that was focused around bulk family editing or processing, which was really relevant to my business because I was doing content management and editing and production, Revit families in bulk. So it sort of lined up with my work at the same time. And the only package that could do that was one called Orchid, which is stored on GitHub and written in C#. So all of the code was locked away and not available to me. And I found the package a bit tricky to use. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to figure out how to do this and break this dependency away. And eventually it led other people to my package as well through the same sort of frustrations with other dependencies. So that sort of got me into Python. I learned from a lot of other people's packages. Just looking at code is often how I learn. I go, that's how that syntax works, or, you know, how do I get like an enumeration to work, those sort of things. I still go back to my own code. I still forget things and learn from myself constantly. But that sort of, eventually led me to pyRevit, I guess, through just knowing that Python naturally leads to pyRevit in the Revit API.
Just to step back, so when you decided that you want to kind of break away from this dependency and create your packages, what was your Python skill? Did you already know Python? Were you an absolute beginner?
Yeah, so I probably spent the first 3 months in very much a beginner space. breaking things, generally breaking fast. Like you said, failing fast, it's the way to do it. It's the best way to learn. So I took a course from, I think it was a website called Data Camp at the time, and they had a lot of like little mini courses on Python fundamentals and, you know, things like for loops, general principles. But I really probably spent the first 2-3 months mostly just using Python and not really using the Revit API. And if I did have to use the Revit API, it was very much through imitating other people's code that I could read and go, I don't really know what's happening here, but I know if I put this here and I do this here, it's going to work. So, and then eventually realized I had to actually take on the Revit API as its own sort of challenge once I went into space where I found no nodes to reference. So I had to learn about classes, methods, properties, and the API. I hadn't really built classes in Python myself at that point, so the whole concept of classes was still really new to me. But I think the API helped me sort of learn about class structure and inheritance and other principles that I brought back to my own sort of Python code in building custom classes, which I know you use like quite a lot in your code in EF Tools, for example. But yeah, that was sort of the...
It's a mixture of good and bad. There's so many things wrong, but yeah.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
All right, so you pretty much learned by doing.
Yeah. Always learn by doing is my take.
The way I see it's very similar to me that you had a problem and you just knew that Python can help you somehow and you just kind of brute force it.
Pretty much, yeah. I think that's really the only way I found has ever worked for me. Just brute forcing my way through, finding little bits of tutorials and resources here and there, but mostly just mucking around until something works. And then suddenly I realize, oh wait, I actually understand what this does. And now that part is solved and I can move on to the next thing. And even jumping into C# recently, I'm still to some degree learning that way. I'm still having to, you know, muck around a little bit, guess a few things. We'll talk about AI later probably, but I use a little bit of that now as well. But yeah, back in the Python days, there was like pretty much no AI solution. So it was just, you know, bend it till it breaks and then figure out why it broke and put it back together and keep bending it. And it just sort of kept going that way until I felt comfortable enough to build my own package and distribute code through the package manager. And that was also its own learning journey. Like it's got its own rules and things you have to follow. But yeah, it was sort of just a process where I just built layer upon layer as I went and sort of fell down occasionally to another layer and realized I did these 2 layers wrong, so I got to go back down 3 layers and then build up again. But it's sort of naturally just how I learn. How about yourself? Did you spend long in Python and Dynamo, or you went straight to pyRevit? Or
the way it was like, so I started with this big project. There was like also massive spaghetti code, and I just saw right away that Revit API can be really useful because I just had like from 40 minutes to 40 seconds. So I knew like, wow, I need it. And then from that moment, at first, I kind of focused more on Dynamo because it was a little bit kind of, I guess, easier to get started with because I didn't know Python and I didn't have time to just take courses and stuff. So I started kind of using Dynamo, and sometimes when I looked, I had like 10 different nodes, and I'm like, that shouldn't be that complicated. I should make it simpler. I started kind of taking these kind of simple data manipulation algorithms and making a Python node. In the beginning, it was just math, right? You take A, B, C, and then you do kind of simple math, A plus B divided by this, just to kind of find spaces and stuff. And then over time, I started learning more and more. Then I was like, I need to do something with parameter. And then I found a video. Somebody showed me how to get parameter, how to set parameter. I'm like, okay. And it's kind of just back and forth between kind of Dynamo and pyRevit. And I was just kind of trying, as you said in the beginning, automate everything. This is what helped me a lot, that I would just practice and, you know, like little pieces from everywhere I would learn. But I neglected on basics so much.
yeah,
Just to explain it, I didn't know that for loops existed. I only knew about while loops for a while. I don't know how I missed it. It's just absolutely the stupidest mistake programmer can make. But I literally, when I needed to iterate for the list, I would create a counter. I would count every iteration in my while loop, and I would sort of recreate for loop with the while loop for some reason. When I found out for loops, I felt so stupid for so long.
The funny thing is, I guess you sort of took the journey that the original programmers built because, you know, you've probably seen the for loops in C. They have an internalized counter variable. So if anything, you actually probably learned that the C loop method to some degree.
But this is the only instance I remember how bad I was, because I was like, I think I didn't even went through the course properly, because every single course will tell you there is a for loop. Here's how it works. And I never heard of it at this point. But then, I started watching courses. I was just watching basic courses like nonstop, like from this guy, from that guy, from like this university, whatever.
Yeah.
And, little by little, I like watching over and over. So I kind of find these little nuggets in between. Because majority of courses, they're the same, but then there's these little things that everybody accidentally mentions or just something nice. And
Yeah, definitely.
that's where I learned a lot. Like least comprehensions, like you watch many courses, you never hear about them, but then you see them, they're like, wow, that's amazing. Because it's like just compresses.
I found a good C# course the other day. I think it was a Rhino platform, and they spend about 20 minutes talking about delegates and events, and they actually explained it really well. And I went nowhere near delegation and all these concepts before I knew of them. I knew how they worked, and it was just such a golden nugget amidst all this generic stuff. And I thought, oh man, that's like a course in itself. So I know what you mean. There's just those little golden nuggets that make them worth watching. Yeah.
That's exactly the point. Because 80% is always the same, sort of. But this 20%, sometimes it's so important.
Definitely. Yeah.
So you started with Dynamo, you started making your crumple package with Python, and then you said that you started to hate all these dependencies and you discovered pyRevit. Could you just kind of take us to the moment where you first heard of pyRevit and how eventually you got to actually start using it?
Yeah, so my first encounter with pyRevit is probably like a lot of people. It's the pattern tool. Everyone finds it through that pattern maker. That's a solid tool, and still is. I still use it for that. But I actually had a few people recommend to me here and there, oh, you like Dynamo, you like Python, you should go and do pyRevit. Like, this is like the next thing. And I went, yeah, it probably is, and just sort of forgot about it. And eventually I heard it enough times, I'm like, okay, I should be going and doing this. Obviously enough people are finding this good. And a guy called Kai Zhu, who was in Melbourne at the time, and I think he's coming back from overseas. He used it at his company and said, you've got to use this. This is like the thing to use. And I started looking into it. And at that time, I was joining the company I work at now, Architectus. And I was coming in with really just Dynamo and Python knowledge. And Dynamo, you can make it scale, but it's really difficult to make it work at scale, in my opinion. There's a lot of things you can do.
Because of the package dependencies or...
dependencies, backwards and forwards compatibility challenges. Like, not every Dynamo is the same, but Dynamo is tied to Revit. So like, if you run a script in 2020, it may not work the same way in 2024, or back the other way. Like for example, today I was getting a parameter that should go null if it's missing in an object, and instead it gave me an empty string. And I'm like, oh, and it threw off the whole logic of the script I was trying to build, because I assumed it was going to work how it should work. So just little things like that. And then one of my co-workers at the time, she told me, do pyRevit, just do it. And I said, okay, I'm just going to do it. And I actually looked at BF Tools. That was probably the first custom toolbar that I went to look at. Yeah,
interesting.
Because I didn't realize pyRevit's own tools were exposed. I thought they were hidden in the add-in. Eventually I realized, you can look at those too. But
that's so huge.
Yeah.
Alt-click and you see the code. There's like, what?
Yeah, the alt click. It's such a tip that all people need to know, but not everyone does. But yeah, I looked at your toolbar and realized you can do custom extensions and run them. I hadn't quite realized it was that easy to just structure toolbars using folders and files. It was very straightforward compared to doing it in C#, because I had tried to learn C# and I just didn't find a course that managed to break it down well for me. But as soon as I saw your toolbar, it really showed me, okay, like, I can do this. This makes sense. And then I went, whoa, like, I have to abandon Dynamo now. I have to do everything in Python. I didn't do the whole Dynamo script with a button approach. I just went, nah, if I'm doing this in a Python app, I'm going to write in Python. So that was pretty intimidating at first, because, all those geometry operations are very different in the API to Dynamo's own geometry engine. All possible, but all quite different. And I guess that sort of got me in, and then I just started building one tool at a time. Started figuring out tools that belong together and stacks and pull downs, and eventually I said, you know what, I should probably just share this with all the users at the company and start releasing this as a toolbar to the firm I worked at, and it sort of gained its own sort of little following, and before I knew it, the whole company was running it. And then eventually we started putting like really big toolkits in there, like printers and room layout sheet generators, and it started becoming actually depended on by quite a lot of people. So it just sort of naturally snowballed over time, and I guess I just found a new community in the pyRevit forums as well, and all the interesting people that work on the program, and it sort of gave me like a second community to enjoy being a part of. So it was a really interesting experience, and I'm glad I found it. But I guess, thank you for making your toolbar, I guess, available, because it was a great learning resource for me. Yeah.
I didn't know that I created TF tools before you. I thought you already also doing something in pyRevit.
Oh, no. I think you were well before me. I think when did you start EF Tools? It would have been like what about 5 years ago?
Oh man, I think in 2019.
Yeah, so
Oh
about
no,
4 years. Yeah.
2000.
No, 6 years.
No. I started it, but I released it, I think, in 21. Man, I don't remember. What is it, 25? Probably 21. I remember it was September. I don't remember exactly. But I remember I thought like, I'm going to spend a month, take my best tools I made for the company and release it as EF tools. It took me like 7-8 months to rewrite a lot of stuff because my first code, they were like horrible and I wanted to make them somewhat decent.
Yeah.
I mean, I rewrote them. Now, if I look at them, I would still consider all of them horrible. I need to rewrite it again.
They're great.
But at the time, I was like, okay, they're useful. I share it, and let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And it went pretty good.
Yeah, I also remember looking at your tools and going, "Wow, you take your commenting and your namespaces very seriously with all the ASCII sort of art that you make for all the import names and things like that. It's pretty cool."
You see, when I was a beginner, I had this issue looking at my code. I tried to make it very I like when things are very nice to look at, because then it's easier to read and so on. And I tried so many things. I tried like dashes, equal signs, making this separated, this and that. And then accidentally I found out that I can use ASCII art. I was like, I want to use that. I haven't seen anyone use it. I don't recommend anyone to use it. Many programmers probably cringe when they see this, but I love it, especially for tutorials. It makes it so much nicer to kind of make these blocks.
All the game fact guides back in the day used to have a big ASCII art at the top of all the facts that you used to write. So it reminded me of that.
Now it's sort of my signature. When I see like newcomers start using these comments, I know definitely where they got this tip from. Because majority of people would never recommend anything. They just say like, don't even use too many comments, name everything proper. People try to go the opposite, just be minimalistic.
Oh, no. I don't believe in authoring code. The self-commenting code, as they call it, where the comments are meant to not be there and your code's meant to be so obvious that someone can understand it. It's a nice idea, but I haven't reached it yet. Yeah.
I know what you mean. Sometimes it makes sense on smaller examples, on bigger ones. I just like the comment. Even if my function name and the description, they kind of mean the same, I still like to have it just for consistency, Yeah,
I was going to say, I might just take a quick break. I just need to turn my air conditioner on. It's a bit hot here, as you can see.
Hi, real quick. If you're into pyRevit and you want to boost your skills in record time, then check learnrevitapi.com platform. You'll find free in-depth courses for any stage of your programming journey. You'll get access to pyRevit Basics, Pro, and Modern UI courses. Plus, you'll also get access to my code library and join my exclusive community for pyRevit developers. In the community, we can chat, discuss programming in Revit, and most importantly, you can ask for help when you need it the most. If that sounds interesting, go to learnrevitapi.com to learn more. And now, back to the show. So let's get back on track. You were saying about your pyRevit story. And it actually reminded me a lot of mine. I had very similar. I also started with Dynamo, was playing a little bit with Python nodes, and then one of the colleagues was like, you should try pyRevit. I was like, yeah. I looked at it, I was like, I didn't understand it like you. I was just like, yeah, it looks cool, but probably complicated. Or there was this kind of barrier that was non-existent, but I made it myself. And then he was like saying over and over, you will love it. I was like, okay, I need to look into this. And then it was like so weird. I started looking at it, I'm like, okay. I tried to find a reason not to use it. And I was like, probably it's hard to make. Then I see you make folder structure, you have your extension. I'm like, no way, that's too simple. What the hell? Then like, as you mentioned, like alt click, you get access to hundreds of available open source tools. I'm like, what the hell is going on? Why is it like, it didn't make any sense to me. I'm like, it's free, it's open source, there is community behind, there are like tons of examples. Creating extension, it's still crazy to me. You just make folder structure, it makes it. And since then, I was like, okay, I need to actually dive into that. And I was similar to yours. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go full Python. Why not? It was a bit bumpy road because in the beginning, there wasn't as many resources. The Python and pyRevit side was fine. The problem was like Revit API and making it work because many examples in C# and back and forth. So yeah. But once you nail the basics, it actually starts to become so much fun because you start automating non-stop.
Yeah, I remember even just the amount of tools that pyRevit gives you as a programmer. Some things I was using and I didn't realize they weren't the Revit API. They were part of pyRevit. Like Asan had built them. Like some of the collectors and like the forms library. Oh my gosh, the forms library, so good. Like having RPW UI and his forms that he's built already was just amazing. Like because in Dynamo we used to have to use this package called data shapes to build better user interfaces, like staged interfaces versus Dynamo Player. And that was the main reason I was hesitant to leave Dynamo, because I was like, well, I've got interface creation there. And as soon as I found those forms that were in there, like I was like, wow, like this ships with the add-in. We don't have to install the dependency on top of pyRevit. It's already there. It was pretty powerful. And the thing that really sold pyRevit to me, and is still one of my favorite things about it, is script.exit. Just being able to stop a script wherever you want. If you hit a cancel point, you don't have to run the rest of the script through like Dynamo, where you have to just null the whole script to the end. It was really cool to just have the ability to sort of gain that control flow in tools that I guess I hadn't experienced in visual programming. So that was like it still is one of my favorite things in pyRevit, just the amount of control flow that Python and written programming gives you.
I think in Dynamo there was some note to stop execution, like you say, but I don't know. There was something wrong with it, but it kind of worked. I don't remember exactly. I just remember I had this need as well, but I gave up on that for some reason.
I think the main issue with stopping a Dynamo script would be race conditions, because if you put like the terminating node on a different branch, I wonder what would happen if like the other one's racing with it to converge at like another node later. Like I wonder if that would work. So my guess is they must intercept the idling event that Dynamo depends on, or somehow stop it. But yeah, it sounds interesting. I never came across it, but it would definitely have been a useful tool in Dynamo for sure.
I'm not sure how well it worked, because I remember I gave up on that really quick. But I remember I found something. It kind of became red. It was a while ago. I'm not much into Dynamo. I barely remember anything now. I'm so in pyRevit now.
Yeah, I mean, the package manager in Dynamo is a bit of a graveyard these days. There's so many old abandoned packages. It's a bit sad. Like, there's some really good package managers still around, but like for every good package, there's like 100 bad ones stuck in the same list as like this one. Whereas like obviously switching to a GitHub style approach with CLI and saying I'll just pull the extensions that I want was a really good change for me as well, because in Dynamo it's so hard to find what the good quality packages are, whereas usually in pyRevit the more information on the GitHub the better the package is generally, because they've put effort into it, so it's obviously a good thing. So like there's still packages on the Dynamo package manager called Test that people have uploaded like 6 years ago, and they're still sitting there, and it's like it's crazy. But pyRevit was a big change in that regard too.
I think the biggest issue is that the biggest kind of Dynamo users, they a little bit outgrown the Dynamo. They went to pyRevit, C#. They started looking for the next step because they have like the most advanced Dynamo users. There are still many advanced users, especially when it comes to 3D geometry and kind of this maybe a little bit generative design. But many people kind of still started using, at least on the side, pyRevit or C#. So this also took a lot of kind of champions away.
Yeah, shout out to Karam Baki there. I don't know if you've met Karam Baki before. He builds a synthesized toolkit and a few other tools like that. He's doing crazy stuff with Dynamo geometry. He's basically built his own little mini engines of geometry inside the program. So there's still like a lot of amazing people in the Dynamo community, and people like John Pearson that have supported and made it such a fun program to use from a community perspective. But yeah, you're right. It does eventually, you sort of outgrow parts of the program, I guess, eventually. And once you want more control over your application and you don't want to depend on the whole platform to run your code, and eventually down the line you get into C# and you want to protect your code as well, which is like another challenge with like Dynamo and pyRevit to some degree. That's the final frontier. How can I stop another company from just taking my code and running it on their side?
Yeah, that's a big selling point for C#. All right, we're gonna get to C# and AI later on. I think now you prepared that demo for us. You mentioned that you want to show us how you use pyRevit at scale. I think now is the good timing to jump into that.
Sure, yeah.
Now that we know how you learned pyRevit, let's see what you made with it.
Yeah, so I guess for full context, this is technically the toolbar that I guess we distributed around our company, and it still sits on a majority of the computers in the company right now, until about 2 weeks from now when my C# tool automatically deletes it, sadly. We ran it for the better part of a year and probably a year and three quarters, roughly 2 years. On pretty much all company machines.
Can you share the screen?
Yeah, I'll share my screen too. I'll just a bit of context. So
you mentioned that you're going to run the C# code to delete your pyRevit extension.
Yeah,
what was that?
Literally a tool inside my toolbar that's just going to gobble up the extension folder once my toolbar finds it, sadly. But I guess this is
self-destruct.
yeah, tools leading tools. So this is the toolbar here. I called it pyRarch, so like pyRevit for Architectus. And each of the tools eventually sort of became like stacks or pull downs, stacked pull downs. And I still very much subscribe to this way of arranging tools for the most part. And they also sort of joined together by function. But I mean, the first tool I built was UpRev Sheets. It's a very traditional tool that I learned to build in most programming languages. And immediately, you know, that there's a form that is given to me by pyRevit to pick a revision. Like, cool, didn't even have to write it. Pick a revision, pick a sheet, and this is all built in pyRevit as well. So you've got sheet sets and filters and all sorts of good stuff. And then I found a progress bar in pyRevit too. So it definitely spoilt me. Like all those forms in that process were just provided by pyRevit. So I think that particular tool, I'm just using PyCharm at the moment, just was an IDE that I used to use. And I think this tool's got a little bit more stuff going on, but in terms of identifying like what the tool was doing, there's a select revision form that's built into pyRevit. If there's no revision selected, exit the script. So that's that sort of script exit thing that I really like using. And then picking sheets to UpRev, script exit. This is a fun little thing I figured out I needed to start doing in Python and in pyRevit, and I still have to do it in C#. And that's actually editable elements. So when you're building in Dynamo, you have the luxury of often running in like test models, and you don't realize that, you know, most of the time your tool's not going to be able to run because it's going to have permission errors with trying to check things out. And this function effectively just tries to check all the elements and only keep the ones that it can. And it gives you like a little dialogue that says, you know, would you like to keep what you can, or would you like to stop the script at this point? And then we head into the progress bar, which is again a pyRevit feature. And then I'm using like with transactions. So again, just a pyRevit feature. This is like the context manager that I think pyRevit naturally abstracts for us. And then formatting a message at the end. But the first version of this tool didn't look anything like this. It was like something like 250 lines and much less efficient. Now it's like I think 84 lines, including comments. But that was sort of like my first tool that, you know, really got me into pyRevit. And then there was more aggressive tools like the nuke tool, which is sort of like the e-transmit tool.
Cleanup.
So that just, you know, launch nuke, bang, and it just strips out the model. So you're doing pretty powerful and quick stuff with pyRevit. Like this has just stripped out all the sheets and views and whatnot. Another really cool feature I like is you can provide context to tools. That was something I learned pretty early on as well, to stop tools running unless their conditions are met before you run them. So like
you mean like contextual?
Like context. So I think if I go to like create work sets, for example, it can only run in like a work shared model, which is a feature that pyRevit provides as well, which in C# is called availability. So I learned about, you know, bundle files and hooking up like wiki links to tools so that people can F1 to all the tools. And it was just such a great toolkit that naturally sort of just lent itself to large company setup. And then I guess eventually we got to more custom complex toolkits like bulk printing. I think there's no sheets, so I don't know if we'll be able to print. I might need to go to another model with some sheets.
What did you use for printing sheets?
So this one, actually, we used to use XRev, which is an Australian company that they're probably one of the most well-known batch printers. And then eventually I realized I can just get PDF24 as a print driver onto everyone's computer. And then I figured out if I overrided a couple of settings in the settings to just say, always print to this folder with a wildcard and always print file name, I could actually get Revit to send prints through to a set folder. So eventually we just built a toolkit that could batch print, and you know, you can do A1, A3. I'll just do the R room layout sheets, for example. Naming rules, we built a naming rule system behind the scenes. I can do of revision from a list of drawing sets. Pick the sheets.
My question was more about the engine, because I was wondering if I'm going to see PDF24. That's open source tools mainly used for printing PDFs.
Yeah.
Because
So,
Revit surprisingly doesn't.
Yeah, these days I use the inbuilt driver for Revit where I can. For example, the toolkit has evolved to give users the option of using print drivers or using the inbuilt print driver in Revit, because they all have their challenges. But I mean, that immediately was like a selling point, because we could just cut XRev out of our cost and just manage it ourselves. And we could do things like build in the company standard naming rule, which is just like pretty much the only naming rule you have by default. But with that, there was like obviously complexities that came with like having to build like very strict string formatting for naming rule systems and educating people how to build their own naming rules out of like little strings and separators and, you know, characters that indicate a project parameter or a sheet parameter. Since this, we've built like more complex tools using C# and forms. But we could have pushed this like harder if we wanted to. But as you can see, it's a lot of...
These forms that you show, is it RPV flex form? Or?
That is, yeah. So that one, I believe, if I look for it, because one thing I learned to do in pyRevit was start to build libraries of utilities and sort of use them across multiple tools, which Dynamo sort of does in packages, but not really. So
oh yeah, that's a big one.
I think in this case, it's probably in the export utils. So somewhere in here, there's an RPW form. I think it's a fair way down. Yeah, it's one of these, like a flex form I think I was using in this case. So yeah, I was just building options out of there and checking if the form ran and yeah, pretty much going from there. I was very flexible with return types. So like one thing I've learned since coming into C# is that return types can be a bit more tricky in other languages, whereas in Python, they're like super flexible. So I was doing things like sending out like 4 booleans as a return type from a function, which is like very unorthodox. Like usually you'd probably like make a class to hold the settings or something like that. But yeah, I was just building up these libraries of functions. So that was pretty handy.
I think in the end of the day, it's just personal preference.
Oh yeah, I've moved on to
people
like
need to focus.
programming now. Like most of my things are static classes, but back in the day, I liked to use just in situ functions. And I did like that you could like just import like a namespace from the library folder. That was really handy as well. So I can just say like from pyRevit import, and then reference or import everything from like, export utils. So if I go to the printing code, which I don't mind showing because it's changed a lot since the tool. I liked that it let me abstract my code to make it simpler, but at the same time, I could very specifically import particular functions to save time, or I could just import like a whole library. Like this one deals with reading Excel files, for example. I think this is actually my printer. My printer is down here.
No, reusing code helps so much. Yeah. I missed it for quite a while. Once I discovered it, I'm like, oh, I need to start reusing my code.
Yeah, definitely.
But I wish
like this printer is 66 lines of code, including comments, so fairly concise. But behind the scenes, obviously, a lot more utility functions that are holding it all together. Like I mean, my printing library is about 750 lines of code, including comments. But yeah, it really helped me to be able to put these together. And I think I was just starting to play with WPF right before I jumped into C#. So that was me just starting with WPF, and then eventually I sort of jumped over. But yeah, it was really fun just being able to build such a wide variety of tools and utilities, and there's more like fun ones that use like Linkify. Like I don't know if there's any images in this model.
Oh, Linkify is huge.
Might be, yeah. So I was starting to use this like output or the console window as well. So I think I'm just trying to find groups. I think I can probably find groups. Here we go. So I used Linkify quite a lot. Just to output certain types of things. These are all like the instances of groups in the model. For people that haven't seen it before, like I can select a detail group, but I can also go to its view, which is pretty powerful. So I've just found that detail group. But one of the fun things is that Linkify gets blocked by IT security in some companies, and unfortunately one of those was the one I work at. So he couldn't actually take full advantage of Linkify. But it still was a valuable report with IDs and things we can reference. But yeah, obviously if I showed you every tool, we'd be here for probably a while.
It's just kind of it's nice to see that there are so many different tools, so many different problems you solved. Could you just share how do you kind of, where do we start? I want to find out two things. First one is, what is your kind of coding process? Let's say you have an idea, you don't have to code anything, it's just kind of general explain. And second question is probably the deployment. How did you share it with the team? So which one you want to jump into first?
Probably coding style is a good place to begin. I mean, I can even just emulate the way that I commonly begin a piece of code. I guess like anything, everything begins as a script and a folder. So generally new folder or directory. I'll usually have a name for it, and it's not too big of a deal what you call it because of the bundle file. But, test dot, push button. I might think about the structure of the tool. Is it a pull down, a stack? Is it going to have to sit in a certain way? But from there, you're pretty much in pyRevit. You're in. You just have a script.py, and this is where you
Do you
work.
actually create it always from scratch, or you just copy existing tools?
A lot of copying. Like I would reuse a lot of utilities from like other scripts. So I usually have starter scripts that I often like to use. So this was like usually at the very least, this is like the boilerplate. For a lot of scripts, it would usually have like at least the pyRevit imports at the start. So the 4 pillars I depend on are Revit, DB, Forms, and Script. They cover a majority of what I used to use. And then this was a little like function that like logs the run of the script. So I didn't really use telemetry. I preferred to run off a different approach. So this one was just actually writing files to a server location. It was much more straightforward.
So kind of logging manually.
Yeah, it was pretty dumb, but it got the job done. But I guess from there I'd be using Pseudo-Code. So let's say I want to build a tool that's going to like let me select all revisions in the project and delete them. So I'd begin by saying, show list to user of revisions. And I used to usually say, okay, what do we have now? We have like list of revisions. And then I'd say, okay, check if revs in use. Show revenues to users, so you'd like warn them, okay, the revisions can't just be deleted, you're going to like merge them with other revisions, and finally delete revisions. And this would be like my pseudocode. And then I'd start going back through and actually starting to replace things. So, it's actually been a while since I've written in Python, so I'm trying to sort of even remember the syntax that I used to use. Because one thing I didn't have stub set up at the moment, so I can't actually get like Intellisense on this computer. So like this is where I'd literally be going to like other tools and going,
we don't have to code it. It's just kind of the process, more like brainstorming. What do you think about? Where you focus? It's more like this. I wonder if there is something that
one thing I did sometimes is I'd talk to someone else about my tool and make sure that what I was building was actually useful, which is something a lot of programmers don't do at their companies as often as they should. To say, wait, if I build this thing, is anyone actually going to use it? Like usually it should be built because someone asked for it, but then you've also got to go, wait, am I solving like a big problem or am I solving a really small problem for one person? So it's like sort of going through that process of like sanity checking yourself is like so important as well. Like there are some tools in this toolbar that I can say got ran like once, like feasibility toolkit. 3 people in the company used it out of 350 Revit users. It's like it didn't make it through to C#, put it that way. Whereas like this tool got like thousands of runs a week just printing, as sad as it is. Room layout sheets. We have a health sector that depends on this toolkit now. So like some of them were complete pillars of like justification for the toolkit, and other ones were me sort of getting too excited and building toolkits because I could, and then going, wait a second, like, does anyone actually want to use this? Like, so generally I recommend like building the prototype, putting that in someone else's hands and saying, do you reckon this is going to help you if I keep pushing it? And you'll probably find that sometimes they'll just say, nah, actually, I don't need this. And you'll probably save yourself a lot of time and your company a lot of money. But yeah, most of these responded to needs, but not all of them. And also the structure of your toolbar is so crucial as well, because you might run out of room eventually, right? So I found that's
where EF tools right now.
Yeah, I found real estate was so important. Like even the length of names of things, like try to bury the length inside the pull down where it doesn't push the toolbar out. Even in GWiz, like this is my little C# toolbar I'm building outside work for fun, because I can't show the actual toolbar at work, which looks a lot more like this. Just keeping things small, lean, navigable. Use pull downs and split buttons wherever you can. Try not to use too many buttons, but that was sort of just like I guess how I started off my tools. I have a lot of utility.
I have a trick question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Have you ever created tools that already exist in Revit natively?
Sort of. Yeah. So there are some that they're pretty much the same thing. Like I made super select everything of the same category or type, and I think of same type already exists. And I didn't realize you can select more than one thing at once and select all an entire project or visible in view.
It's only in 2023 or 2024 they added it.
So I didn't even notice, and I actually ended up building a tool that basically just does that. And I was like, okay. So I thought it was like really cool, and then I just tried it out of curiosity, and I was like, oh no, it already exists. But funnily enough, sometimes people don't realize a feature exists until you build a tool that makes it more obvious. For example, like at work in my new toolbar, there's a dark mode, and everyone's like, whoa, dark mode. Like, I can't believe there's dark mode in Revit, and they're in Revit 2025. And I'm like, this was in 2024. This isn't new. You
actually made your own dark mode?
Yeah, so this one, you can't see it in here because this is C Sharp, but if you're in 2024 or higher, there will be a tool for dark mode there as well. So it's all it does is just toggles the UI that Revit does normally. But because dark mode is like buried under file, options, graphics, I think it's under colors, there's like another section they've added here.
There is a button somewhere.
Yeah, users
view
just
as
don't
well.
know it exists. Because often our Revit users, they're not like die-hard Revit fans, so they're not checking like the
Yeah.
new features every day. Some people just use Revit
Yeah,
because they have to, right? So sometimes tools can help expose those opportunities more natively to people as well. I think technically like this tool, yeah,
I'm a huge fan of dark modes, but Revit dark mode is just like, yeah.
yeah,
It's the only software I stay with the light theme because dark is just makes it worse and reminds me on AutoCAD for some reason.
I think the
I
main
don't know
problem with
why.
dark mode, and I've told Autodesk this a few times, is every time you open a secondary menu, you get like a flashbang. It's like dark to light to dark
That's
to
too.
light.
It's
Just
so buggy.
terrible. It's like it's impossible to work that way. Like, 'cause you just get blinded every time anything opens.
Yeah.
I mean, some tools are like really simple. Like some are stupidly simple, like just boot up the intranet, boot up Revit API docs, and they're not like hard tools, but like sometimes these little shortcuts, just hey, a little promo for you. But I guess even those things, they just make things that little bit more obvious to people, like a button that takes you home to the home screen, because people don't even know that Revit has a home screen in a model. They just made the way that Revit behaves more obvious to users. Some tools I even hijacked. Like I used to have a settings button that took you to the pyRevit settings, and it was just a copy of pyRevit settings. And look, make pattern. Yeah, I've put the pattern tool inside our toolkit. So I didn't write any of that. I just copied it. Sorry, son. But yeah, it was good fun. But yeah, sometimes there are tools that like probably don't need to exist that get created occasionally by accident. But at the same time too, sometimes the good thing about writing your own tools is you can make them that little bit better than other ones. Like for example, purging views not on sheets. So this is like a very common task that people do. But the problem is that a lot of add-ins out there don't think about view dependency. So if I delete this view, what other views will get deleted with it? And a really common problem
Like,
is,
you mean like dependent views?
yeah, so like if you have like a master view and 3 dependents, some add-ins actually give you the master
Oh.
as a deletion candidate, which is really bad. Or there might be a call out,
Yeah.
depending on a call out on a call out. So this tool we build actually exhausts all those relationships and says, I'm going to check like, and as you can see, it's not going to offer this view because it knows there's like 3 dependent views. And that can be
makes
quite
sense.
tricky to do with call out relationships, but it helped us, better understand what some tools don't do well for us as well. Because when you have those programmers in house, they can look at these tools and go, whoa, like that's not right, or this could be better. So yeah, it was just a good fun opportunity that came with it.
Oh, quite impressive toolbar.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
And how did you manage deployment? And how big is the team that you're working on?
Sure.
I think
So,
it sounds like a big office, right?
yeah, so we have about 700 people in the whole company. And then we have about 350 of those are regularly jumping in Revit. And probably I estimate about another 50 will, open Revit on like an off day. So it's quite a lot of people spread across, I think it's 12 studios, I'm pretty sure, that we were getting out to. And I'm fortunate to have an IT department that is quite flexible and quite willing to work with us to figure out what we can do. But I'm also very fortunate to work on a team of about 22, I think it's 22 of us at the moment, that all specialize in digital and BIM. And some of us belong to sectors, some of us work together on computation and application development or web development. So I had a few people on my team that weren't necessarily building it with me, but understood what I was doing, which really helped. In terms of deployment, I looked into CLI and some of those more automated approaches and realized that getting something like that to work in a large company with security barriers and not being able to get the whole company to work off GitHub, especially if it's a private GitHub because we can't share the toolbar, that sort of made CLI not really a feasible solution for us, at least initially. I'm sure there's probably ways we could have made it work, but it was a lot. So what I ended up doing is just saying the goal that we want to aim for here is we want to end up with this folder with my panel.extension in it, in this location on every computer. Users, your username, @data roaming, pyRarc, or for people that know it, @data percentage. And that was our deployment location to get it locally on all computers. And then from there, we have the pyRevit config.ini. and we were effectively pushing this out without the clone, but in this case we just put a wildcard in here and path the extension through. So all we had to do was really just do like a robocopy in principle. So we had like an installer through an application called Intune that would run when a computer boots up and just get a copy of pyRarc onto the computers when we wanted it to be there. But eventually I realized that sometimes I'd be on a call with someone and there's a bug, and I'd go, wouldn't it be great if I could just literally get a bug fixed to them like almost straight away? So I ended up building this like hacky installer called Update to Latest. And this thing is a total hack. Like, you're going to laugh when you see how this works, but it worked, sadly. And this let me get updates to people like whenever I wanted to. So I think it's here. All this thing did was download a zipped copy of my toolbar off of our SharePoint. So obviously you can only access the SharePoint if you're in the company, so that helps sort of secure it. And then it goes through steps. So firstly, it downloads the zip. I use a loop to just wait. Eventually, I think I count, and I use a while loop, and I just basically wait until that zip has shown up in the downloads folder. Once it has, I unzip the zip, and then I delete the old pyRarc from the location it should be in, and then I just copy the panel.extension over the top. And pyRevit extensions have this really cool behavior where, as long as this has been loaded into Revit, if you delete the whole toolbar files and put them all back in the same place, it's going to still know where to find the scripts and it's not going to break. So I literally could like go and update that SharePoint.zip in the middle of a call with someone and just say, hit the update to latest button, and I've just fixed your bug in the same call. So it was pretty rapid in terms of how we could get this out. Obviously not very secure. That was probably the main drawback to having, I guess, such an open toolbar. I don't know if anyone's taken my toolbar outside the company. I'm sure they've probably tried here and there. There's a few security measures built into it. They're very, very subtle. But yeah, that was probably the main drawback. But being able to give people updates like that quickly was obviously a pretty amazing experience that, pyRevit enabled us to do.
Sounds to me that pyRevit CLI could work eventually, maybe not with the GitHub, but with something like Bitbucket. I'm not exactly sure, but as I understood, Bitbucket is more enterprise-oriented with more security features. Yep. I might be wrong about that. I never used Bitbucket. But I think just the idea of the Git for the code, it would make updating much faster because you would have an option to just update one file instead of the whole thing.
Totally. I mean, doing a comparison, would be faster. Yeah, I guess I sort of looked at CLI and I sort of tried to appreciate that it wasn't really trying to be a closed solution as well. So I didn't want to use pyRevit in a way that was against the spirit of pyRevit as well. So I didn't really want to come and bother, the community and say, hey, can you like make this enclosed way of using the toolbars? And I didn't want to make that like against the way that the community develops. So I sort of said, well, I've got to solve this on my own 2 feet. If I want to use it for my own company purposes, I should figure this out myself, and that was sort of my middle ground that I used at the time. I guess the thing too is I was donating to pyRevit through Patreon at the time, and that was probably about as much as I could really do to support pyRevit. So I didn't want to put any extra pressure on the community to modify the way that such a fantastic toolbar was already functioning, because I know that they were going through the 2025 migration at the time, which, as you know, has been a really big amount of work for them. I think they've just got the final installer out, which is great. So I think I'm actually running the latest one here, actually. This is the latest pyRevit. I've just hidden all the tools, but yeah. So there you go.
Funny enough, pyRevit team, they made it compatible with 2025 half year before they released it, because they wanted to like fix all the little things here and there before release. I think that's what many people started kind of looking at pyRevit a little bit. We need to wait for the update. Yeah,
that's honestly, that is one of the reasons we moved away from using pyRevit at the company, because I guess it just signified to us that, again, we had gained a dependency on a brilliant tool and a brilliant toolkit, and with the right amount of work and trust and collaboration, it will keep going into the future comfortably. But there was like roughly a year of downtime, I think, on the installer. So we actually figured out how to modify some of the pyRevit files to get it to work in 25 for us. Because we didn't really use any of the actual pyRevit tools, so we didn't have to worry about some of these tools breaking. So we actually just figured out there was a few variables in some of the loader files. That was the main issue I think they had at first, and we fixed those internally. I did go on GitHub and say, hey, if you do this, it works. But there was all sorts of other problems that change causes for the tools in pyRevit itself. So that was sort of our workaround in the short term. We installed the whip version, and then we ran like a small script that modified some of the internal files of pyRevit to keep working. So we had 2025 working about probably about 7-8 months ago. But obviously pyRevit itself was still being developed at that time, so we appreciated that was our solution. Yeah.
All right, and eventually, as you mentioned, you moved away from pyRevit to C#, and where you are right now, are you completely abandoning pyRevit? Are you going full speed on the C#? Where you are?
Yeah, good question. So I guess we more or less put pyRevit down for now. I'd pick it back up again if enough people in the company were really keen to collaborate in that language, because I think Python is a really friendly language to work in. C# is a little bit more application orientated. There's a few more things you have to learn in order to make it work, and I think that class orientated programming is harder to begin with, so not everyone naturally finds C# sort of I guess aligns with how they want to learn. So that would probably be why I'd pick this up, but for now we are sort of putting this on the shelf, and there is effectively a whole new C# set of tools with like additions and changes and features. So I literally had to sit down, and from the ground up, I figured out how to build all the little bits and pieces that pyRevit had spoiled me with over all those years. And some of them I built outside the company, like the real core of my C# tools I've actually just built outside and just called it GWiz. And this is sort of like a C# project that's on GitHub that literally just has like utilities and extension classes and all sorts of like cool functions. It has forms. So like I've built up some Win forms. So like I have like a list view, like pyRevit has a list view, and I sort of just figured out over time how to build these things. Are still loading, but it looks very similar to pyRevit's list view, if a little bit more basic.
How long did it take to rewrite it? Because there are so many tools and files you have, also the libraries.
So some of it was easy. So some tools were like very modular in how I wrote them originally. Like they were almost like a toolkit of things that work together. Other things took longer. So I think I spent the better part of like 3 months of not quite full time, but probably like half time doing it. So about a month and a half of resourced time. And that was sort of me learning C# at the same time as well. I did some of this outside work just to lighten the load at work, but also to make sure that I could actually share at least the core utilities that were like building this sort of framework, because I knew I wanted to teach people on YouTube as well. So luckily my contractors, got a bit of flexibility built into it. I'm sort of allowed to do what I want on my own tools, as long as it doesn't, obviously conflict with company interests and IP and values. So in this case, I brought like some of these core utilities in-house. So I had to build like some things again, like for example, checking if the shift key is held down so that I could build my own sort of secondary fire modes like pyRevit does. And then some of the forms, I had to figure out how to build like a progress bar, for example. That was really fun.
Yeah, I saw your post recently on LinkedIn where you discovered something about progress bars.
Obviously like C# lets you be a lot cleaner with how you lay out your code, so I use regions a lot. But like there were similar things in there. I use a lot of classes and custom classes, and I might just show some of them in action. Like the up rev tool is just here as well, bulk revision, pick a revision, pick sheets. So it's very similar in terms of like the general behaviors that I've experimented with before, but now built just using C# instead. I obviously tried to emulate some of the features in pyRevit, like colored tabs. So I figured out how to do colored tabs. That was pretty fun. I've got like a command interceptor like Guardian. So if you try to import CAD, it'll say, "You sure you want to do that? Really? Not good practice." And you can say no. So a lot of little things.
So event triggers.
Yeah, it was good fun. And like I had to figure out how to do like context again. So like at the moment, these tools are all available. But like before, if I make a new project and it's not work shared, again, I'll find some of these.
Can I disable them if they're not matching something?
Yeah, so you can see but now I had to figure out, okay, how does this actually work? Because pyRevit actually abstracts this for us. It creates a context system, but in Revit API, it's actually called availability. So I had to like learn how to build toolbars and control buttons. And I really came to appreciate pyRevit in that regard, like that it hides so much of this stuff from you. So you have to actually build like availability classes that provide context conditions. Like if I'm in ZeroDoc, I just always return true, and that lets my tools run with the document closed, because by default it's just, is it a document? And then I had to build like what I call extension methods. So some people will know what they are, and thanks to Sean Page for showing me how to do these. So you can extend what class objects can do. So if you say like this in front of your first variable, it actually becomes like a method for a base class. So now the pull down button class has the ability to add push buttons to itself. But as you can see, I use a lot of comments and I try to keep it super clean. And then eventually you actually have to build your toolbar. So I have like a section that's dedicated to just like, I'll open this one, for example. So like constructing the data for pull downs to hold on to, then stacking the pull downs into stacks. So it's a lot more complicated than pyRevit. Obviously, the way they do it is very simple. And then actually adding push buttons to pull downs. And you can see this is the point where I say you're available when we're in a document. So that's like context, if you will.
Yep.
And then I had to figure out like, okay, how do I get tooltips? So I had to build like a tooltip resource where I actually read the tooltips from a big file instead of having to write them in code. So there's a lot of really different things I had to learn. It gave me a lot of appreciation for pyRevit and how much it does for me.
Yeah, it definitely simplifies a lot.
Yeah.
And what's your general opinion on this kind of debate between C# and Python? Because many people have conflicting views. Somebody hates C#, somebody hates Python, and everybody has their own reasons. What's your conclusion on this?
Yeah, I like both. I think that the best language is the one that works for you and the people you need to support, right? That's the right answer to that question. So if you're working at a company that only writes in Python, sorry, you're going to have to like Python, right? Like you've got to work with your team, not against them. And yes, there's going to be benefits to working in one over the other. I think with Python, the benefit is you can get going a lot faster. But the drawback is you have to depend on a lot more being built so you can actually run Python, like usually through an interpreter or something like that. So like pyRevit, for example, like if you use Python, you're not really using Python, you're using pyRevit, but using Python to work with pyRevit to get the interpreter to run your code in the API. Whereas in C#, obviously there's benefits, like there is a slight speed benefit here and there, but obviously you have way more control over your code. You can compile it, you can protect it to some degree. There are more complex features that I think are easier to do in C#, especially when it comes to like event subscriptions. I found WPF is a bit more intuitive in Visual Studio. Like for example, if I go into Visual Studio, so if I look at one of my forms, like you obviously have a visual editor, but then behind the scenes, C# actually builds your form for you. So this is all written by the editor and you don't have to write any of it. Whereas usually you'd be writing this out in Python, right? Or you'd be doing it in C# and then copying it into Python, sort of refactoring it to suit. And then behind the scenes, it's very easy to just sort of wire up your class and tell it how to construct itself. And again, a lot of this is just sort of very, very intuitive, I found. Like this is an event sender, so it just takes when I hit select, what does it do? So I think that is powerful, but more work, yeah.
Can you go back to the previous file?
Yeah, this one.
Did you use XAML for the layout, or did you lay out it with this code? Like
so this is all written by Visual Studio for me. So I actually start here. So if I want to make like a new form, add new item, Windows form, it should pop up eventually. So I want to pick a Windows form. I'll just say my form.
Okay, using the Windows forms, not the VPF.
Yeah, so I've used WPF at work a little bit more, but I found that initially it was too complex. There's always a broken call that happens here because I have a class name space clash somewhere in here. I have to go behind the scenes and tell this thing it's a Windows form. But yeah, I generally started this way with most of my Windows forms. WPF obviously is a bit more complicated, but I found that I guess Visual Studio is a very good IDE to sort of hold relationships between objects very dynamically. So like, for example, if I'm in a command class, for example, I found the Intellisense is very powerful. So if I go to command and I go to make a new, I'll just work in a command. I'll just start at the front of a command. So if I want to just pull in like a class, usually I use what are called like aliases. So I say that forms is gform is my shortcut for like gwiz.forms. And I just say, gform, and I can say custom, and then I can pick like a form. and it starts really prompting you through, like, I want to do a select from list, I need some keys, I need some values. So it is a very nice experience, I found. I did work with stubs in Python and try to get some Intellisense going with the API, but it was nowhere near like what I found the guidance was like for C# as well. One thing that a lot of people find really weird in C# is you declare the types before you say what the object is. Obviously, you can say var for like any type, but I can also say I'm expecting a form results object, or actually, let's do a collector. So if I say
the type hinting is a big one.
So if I say like list walls is new filtered element collector doc. This is something I really like too. System link as well. It's really cool. So I can say, okay, I want to get like all walls and to lists. So Visual Studio will say, no, like that's not good enough. Like you're not going to end up with, I think in this case I probably made a mistake somewhere, but where have I went? Yeah, 2 elements probably is the one. Probably, I think I've made a typo somewhere, or I've just put something a bit out of line, but yeah, here we go. This is what I'm looking for. So it's literally telling me I'm ending up with a list of elements, whereas I actually need a list of walls. So you can sort of check yourself against your types. And I think you can like type hint in Python as well. But I wasn't really generally finding that was the pattern that people followed in Python, whereas I really like in C# that you can sort of force yourself to end up with like a consistent return type to know that you're definitely dealing with like what you want. So then if I just, cast wall, and you can see it knows what I want to do. It literally, like the IntelliSense is pretty strong in here, and it knows I don't even need to, I just go to list now and it'll satisfy the issue. So like things like that, just little helpers that I found guide me through the script writing process, really help me just get to where I need faster. But I can totally understand why this is like a huge hurdle to overcome, because I had to overcome it. It was a lot of work to get my head into this space and actually start going, oh, what's this, and it just keeps building up. But once you've got a few things working, you can start to sort of build on it, figure out where there's better ways of doing things. But yeah, once I sort of got my head into it, it got pretty easy. But yeah, probably like 2 months of frustration, and then like now I'm pretty much sailing at this point, I'd say. Yeah, so yeah, but I think it's not for everyone. I think C#'s like a very different way of writing code. It's much more about building an application and less about building a toolkit. So yeah, it's not for everyone, but I guess I found it was for me once I sort of got my head around it. Yeah. How about yourself? How do you feel about C#?
I like that in the beginning you said that between C# and Python you need to find what works for you. Yep. This is also very aligned with what Eshan said. I'm going to release the episode very soon. It's almost edited. But yeah, he also said that everyone has their own kind of thinking, and if the programming aligns with the way you think, it's great. And it's just like you said, like whatever is used in the company, or everyone has their own needs. In my case, I haven't coded with C#. I can read C# really well because I've translated so many C# code into Python that I naturally understand all the kind of logic. I don't know the deployment much. I don't know how to actually kind of make the installer, this kind of part. But in terms of code, I understand the logic, I understand all of this, and that it's very object-oriented programming related. For me, I'm die hard for Python. It's going to be very hard for me to switch to anything just because I don't want to. And for the same reason, I saw recently a really good kind of argument for the Python. There's like, Python is not always the best kind of solution to the problem, but it's often like one of the easiest and universal. Because if you want to build a website, probably you want to go with React, Svelte, all these kind of frameworks. But if you know Python, you can use Django, or you can also use Wagtail and make it very quick. If you want to do something like data processing, you can use this and this and this languages. But you can also use Python. It's not going to be always the best choice, but it's often going to be more than enough for majority of people. And I think for me, that's a big point, because I focus a lot on beginners, how to get people into programming. And with Python, I like it much more. It's much more readable to me. It's much easier to start. And in my case, as I mentioned, I started without watching any Python courses. I didn't know what for loop is. And I managed to make some code. It worked. It gave me results. It solved the problem. And I think in the end of the day, that what matters to a lot of people. But I see that many people say when they start with C# it was easier. Some people say when they started with Python it was easier. Like, I think just everyone has their own way. Yeah, and the biggest issue I see when people start going there, like, when they ask hardcore, like Python user like myself, is C# or Python better? at least I'm being honest and I say, well, first of all, if you ask Python user, probably going to hear that Python is better.
Exactly.
And if they're going to go to a hardcore C# user and like, is Python or C# better? They're going to find all the reasons to why C# is better. It's not always the case. Many people are very transparent and say like, look, if you're new, you never coded, probably start with Python and then kind of build on top of that. Because object-oriented programming is definitely a big, big roadblock in the beginning. I don't know how was your journey, but when I was with kind of learning Python, I understood like, okay, here are the if statements, there are the for loops, there are functions. Eventually I got to object-oriented programming and I understood how to write classes, but for me, big thing, I never understood why would I want it. I have functions. I can do it with functional programming. And it didn't click for a long time. I already kind of, okay, I don't need classes, gave up on that. A few weeks went by. I didn't try to kind of do anything with them. And I don't know, this was one of these moments where just like something clicked in my brain. And I was like, I think I understand why I need object-oriented programming. And it started making more sense out of nowhere. I wasn't coding. I was just kind of going about my day. So I think it's the way of thinking that we need to adapt a little bit. And some people can get it right away based on their previous experiences. Maybe, as you said, with Warcraft, it already kind of gave, you kind of planted the seed for the programming, but maybe you didn't realize it. But for some people, it takes a while to understand certain concepts. This is why also when people say, how long does it take to learn programming? I'm like, I don't know. Some people start in second day. Some people take month. It's very depends on how fast something clicks for you, because you have to make your own, like connect dots certain way.
Yeah. Another follow-up question, I guess, that I always give people is, what do you want to do with it? Like, what are you trying to do? Because that will very much influence the answer of your question as well. Like if you're doing data science, you might not need C#. You might just, because you might use this matplotlib and pandas and you're sailing like it's already built for you. Whereas if you're, building, you don't want someone to be able to open your code up. It's meant to be protected. Yes, probably you're likely going to be in C# at that point. So it just comes down to those factors. And I found object-oriented programming took a while for me to get. I have a really good example that I show people sometimes of like where, object-oriented programming really helped me, especially in my own toolbar. I'll just share my screen again. So like all my forms that I build, for example, and this is a little bit different to the forms in pyRevit, they all actually end up outputting the same object, which is a form result. So I ended up building a custom class that has objects or an object, and this is how I can handle like sending multiple objects or single objects in a multi-select scenario. Was the form cancelled? Is the result valid? And was the result of the form affirmative? Yes or okay? And that's like my return type of every single form that I build. So I still do a lot of like function-based programming, but I found like C# with a return type. I'll just find an example of a return type of a form result. There it is. Helped me sort of better understand, okay, like sometimes classes really help you abstract something into like a really simple scenario. So like, for example, when I run my revision script, if I open up the uprev tool, when I'm actually getting revisions, I'm getting a form result. I'm checking, was the form result cancelled? Because I send out a form result, and then if it wasn't, then I get the object as a revision. And then for the sheets, I can ask for the objects instead of the object. So it's a really flexible, like sort of custom thing that helped me make my forms really intuitive at the surface level. And I always find it's a good example of, where object-oriented programming makes sense, because you can really abstract things to a more logical way of working. And a lot of things I do now are very much still very inspired by pyRevit. Like this is very much how a progress bar in pyRevit looks. You kick off a progress bar, you kick off a transaction, you check if the progress bar has been cancelled, and then you increment the progress bar. Like pyRevit's almost the same in principle. So like I still take so much inspiration from like the way that pyRevit sort of educated me to manage certain classes and objects. And yeah, definitely, I definitely don't feel like I've abandoned it. I'm still very much spiritually in pyRevit when I work, but just using programming in a slightly different way now. So yeah, just thought I'd share that.
UI design is a very good example for object-oriented programming, because this is where classes actually, they make so much sense there. Because in the beginning, when you learn about classes, then you try to apply classes to everything you do, and it doesn't really work. This is why it doesn't click, because you're just trying to take the same code, make it you can do it, that's also going to work, but in the beginning, you just see it a bit pointless, because it worked before, why change it?
Yeah.
But with UI forms, especially when you go in BPF, it makes so much sense, because you kind of have already separate like UI XAML format, then you have your Python format, and everything is also a class. Your form is just one big class of form, and then you can modify it. It starts to make sense more, but in the beginning, it's just hard to come up to this example that you actually need, because you always see this kind of tables about employees. You have a class of employee, then you like, you know, the dogs, animals, all this, and you like, cool, I get the concept. Why do I need it?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, that's what I encourage people when they ask me what should I do to learn to program, and I say find a problem that matters to you. Because like you said, the employee table, like I don't run a company. I don't need an employee table. I don't have a banana
It's
or
just
an
the
apple.
examples that everyone uses, like a class of person, like all this. And I mean, it's good, abstract enough, but eventually you start asking questions. Why do I need it?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, at the end of the day, programming should be a personal journey for anyone. I always find there's sort of like two types of programmers I run into on average that are learning. There's the one that's doing it because everyone else is doing it, and it's just what they have to do, which is generally like the wrong reason, but eventually you might find your way to programming for you. And then there's the ones that they literally are just so sick of their job or doing things in a dumb way, and they're like, I can do this better. And programming is like my escape from, the mundane sort of my career. They're the most common types of people I run into, and I always encourage everyone to be more like the second person, because you have like a really strong motivator to keep going and to escape from a problem that you can solve using programming.
Yeah, you need a lot of motivation in the beginning.
Totally.
Because there's like, this learning dip. Beginning, whatever skill you take, in the beginning it's fun and cool. Then you hit your first big roadblock, and this is where many people quit. But if you keep going, this is where the things get fun, once you go past this kind of learning dip. And I think on this note, it's also a good place to ask. I like to ask all my guests, what is the number one advice you would give to beginners, like to programming in general? Probably Revit users, since that's where we are.
I think the number one thing for me is keep going. That's advice I need to tell myself all the time, because it is easy to get frustrated, and it's very easy to get stuck in corners and not quite know where to go next, or not know why something's not working. You've just got to keep going. Make sure, obviously, you're being smart about how you keep going, like contact people that might know answers, engage with forums, try to find resources that might work for you. But it's hard programming. Like it's not an easy thing, I think. Like it is an extra skill set on top of being an architect, an engineer, a designer, a business manager. It's an extra thing, and it's not the core business service of architecture especially. That's a really important thing to remember. Like your code is only useful if it makes the business money at the end of the day, like by making it more efficient or by adding to the service they can offer. Like it'll be frustrating because you'll have to sell why you're doing it to people sometimes. That will be frustrating too, but you just got to keep going. You've got to be patient with people, patient with yourself, and just it's all a journey. Like there's going to be struggles, there's going to be good times. There's going to be really confusing times. There's going to be scary times when like AI comes along and tells you that everyone's going to be a coder. I'm still waiting for it, but like there's going to be a lot of emotional experiences.
Well, they need to sell the hype.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think we're almost in the trough. But I guess that's my main advice. Keep pushing. And if you get stuck, come to people like us. We're generally quite accessible people. Like I think we're always happy to give even just quick tips if we're busy. I try to be super accessible. I won't always be that accessible. Like I'll probably have kids and stuff one day, and it'll be harder. But my hope is that other people get inspired and continue to support the industry, and I'll try to keep developing resources as long as I can for the industry as well. But yeah, keep pushing. How about yourself? What's your main sort of tip?
I think there are a few things. One of them is sort of, you need the basics, because without basics, it's not fun.
Yep.
You just like, in the beginning, people like, why do I need Python? It's easy. I'm just going to jump straight to Revit API.
Yep.
And then what I see people struggle with is they have Python questions when they deal with Revit API, and they don't know either of them, and now they're trying to juggle two things, and it's very distracting, and it also gives you this false feeling that everything is super hard. But this is just in the beginning, like once you have the basics, like absolute, like just the computational kind of logic, how to create logical flow, how to like, if statements, then once you go to Revit API, you already have one problem less. You don't think about logic as much, you just think about how do I communicate this logic with Revit, which is completely two different things, right? One is logic, other is like, I don't know, how do you work with specific things.
I guess, yeah.
So I think my main one is more into like this kind of focus on the basics, don't skip on them, because I skipped, and firsthand I can tell you that you're going to struggle with so many stupid things that you would just in the beginning would spend a little bit, prepare yourself. It's like the quote I mentioned about the axe, just sharpen the axe before you're going to cut the tree, then it's going to all work.
Yeah, I always sort of use an analogy for that one, because I agree. Fundamentals, like if you're not bored for a bit, you probably skip something. It's usually what I like to say, that there are some necessary things you have to go through. So when I first played Pokemon on the Game Boy. I didn't actually read the instruction manual, and I didn't realize you can catch Pokemon. I thought the only Pokemon you get is the first one they give you, and you've got to beat the whole game with one Pokemon. And I beat the game.
Oh no, haven't you watched anything?
I beat the whole game with one beefy Charizard, and then I realized, oh, you can catch these things. So like, read the manual is another thing too, right? Read the docs, like check out what you're getting into before you start coding. Like have a look at the primers, the wikis.
How did you miss it?
You just read the manual as well.
Haven't you watched the cartoon where all they do is throw Pokeballs all the time?
No, I didn't watch the cartoon, and I guess like Ash is the same. He only uses Pikachu, right? So he catches all these Pokemon, and he only ever uses Pikachu. So I sort of did the Ash journey.
Because this was my first question: how do I throw a Pokeball when I played in this game?
Yeah, the old man in Viridian City tried to show me, and I just completely missed it, and I kept going. So, but read the manual is the other tip I have. Yeah.
I see. Now, how are you on time?
Yeah,
do we have
fine,
a little bit time?
Yeah, if there's more you want to talk about. Yeah.
Perfect. I just want to ask you about, well, AI is a big topic. Somehow I missed this topic in the previous podcast because I packed so many questions I had to skip a lot, but now I'm smarter. Just in general, how do you use AI in programming? Do you use a lot? Do you rely a lot? And
yeah, so C# was probably taught to me a lot through GPT. I had a lot of conversations with the GPT to really start understanding how this all works. I learned you can feed code into AI and get answers back with context about the code, so that helped me. Sometimes I'd see something and go, what does this mean? Please break it down for me. I've got no idea what this piece of code is doing. Or I'd send code back at the GPT and say, is that the best you can do? Is there something more efficient than this? Because occasionally it writes very verbose code, like very complex code that doesn't actually need to be that complicated. Like for example, the shift key, checking when the shift key is held down. ChatGPT taught me how to do it using internal pointers in C#, which aren't exposed to you naturally, that you have to draw upon a DLL to access. And it turns out you can just go keyboard, key pressed, shift.
Yeah, it's not always the sharpest tool in the box.
So like it showed me how to do it in a very memory efficient way, but it didn't show me the best way. So I threw the code back at it, and eventually it was like, oh, whoops, yeah, there's actually like a really simple way to do this. But I found that was really beneficial for me, but only because I knew what I wanted to get out of the exchange. I wasn't coming in blind. I had a really set goal in my mind. I had a good understanding of the fundamentals already. I'd used Python. I knew about object-oriented programming, so I could have a conversation with it. If I came at it as a Dynamo user, it probably wouldn't have worked because I would be talking a very different language to like what I was trying to get out of the conversation. It would be like talking to someone in a different language and you only know like 2 or 3 words. And they go, oh yeah, I know that word, but I don't know what the rest is, so I'm just going to make the rest up. And that's probably like the worst thing about AI is that it makes stuff up. It doesn't say my confidence is at 2%. So take it as you will. It just says, here's the answer. And I wish it would change. I wish they would put confidence ratings on things and say, this is actually how confident this thing is in the answer it gave you, because that's like the worst part of AI for me.
That's actually a good idea, the confidence marker. Because with AI, what I notice is that your kind of the output is going to be as good as your input. Because you need to kind of direct it. When you don't know anything, it's still good. It's going to help you a lot. But what happens later on is that it's not replacing people completely with programming. It just makes good programmers much better programmers because they know how to ask questions. They also know how to guide it. And they not just say like, hey, I have a tool. I want to delete all revisions. And that's it. No, so if you're going to describe, okay, I have this tool, I want to do it this way. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. If you see something else, just let me know, blah, blah, blah. It's already so much better output.
Yep.
And for the prompting, I've noticed one prompt that works really miracles for explaining code. Because you mentioned that you kind of gave the code and I also wrote on it. I'm just going to say that what I like to do is like I drop like the regular, like I want you to act as a seasoned Python developer and so on. But then I ask it to make a tutorial out of it. Then it thinks completely different. Not like for the video or something, just for me, like explain it to me. And I say like, I will provide a piece of existing like pyRevit code and I need you to provide short, clear code override outlining all steps. Then write step-by-step tutorial tailored for beginner pyRevit user, explaining each section of the code in simple terms. And also for beginners, I like to throw in like, describe all Revit API concepts necessary for this example. This one, I literally noticed a big difference in the reply because once you say like make it a tutorial, it just like, okay, tutorial, beginner, it just starts explaining each step. And in the end, it also says like, oh, you need to know filtered element collector, which does this. You also need to know transaction, which does this. This one is actually, I'm not so much into prompt engineering. I barely, I want to take some courses to get better at it. I just don't have time for this. But this one, I just kind of, I don't know how I just end up coming up with this. I was just trying like this, and then I'm like, oh, that's actually a good one.
Does it put the ad for Raid Shadow Legends at the start as well? For the mobile, does it put the ad for the mobile game at the start of the video as well? Or because it's like doing the tutorial. Like, thanks for watching, guys. Anyway, I'm going to tell you about our sponsor today. It's good fun. I think that's right. And I mean, one thing that does worry me about the culture of AI is I'm not sure if anyone feels motivated to learn like they used to anymore, because they feel like it's got it covered for them. And I do worry that we're sort of disabling the next generation of people that become middle managers and upper managers. And we're already seeing a real lack of middle management opportunities coming out of the younger generation because they haven't really been given those opportunities. And AI does become this like concept where it's like, we don't need juniors anymore. And well, where do your middle ground developers come from? Where do your senior developers come from? They're all going to retire one day. Like, it's like, are we cutting out the knees of the industry if we're not careful? That's the thing that concerns me. Like, I know Meta's, saying we're going to have like just everything's going to be done in AI. It's like,
oh yeah, they're still doing their metaverse, which nobody wants and ever uses. I don't know anyone who uses it. I tried it. No, thank you.
Yeah, and I also subscribe to the idea of like dead internet theory, where eventually it's just robots talking to robots, right? And it's like at some point we're just going to ruin man-made environments. Like the internet will just get ruined beyond the point of use, and it's like, is it even worth it? Like, so and I feel like that the moral and the ethic fabric of AI is being sort of conveniently ignored to some degree as well, right? Like there's a lot of companies that are skipping some very due diligent based steps here where it's like, I think you forgot a few social barriers. So I'm a little bit on the fence with those sides of AI, but I see the promise. I've experienced the promise. I think it's going to take a long time before we see, like the whole architectural process replaced. I don't think that's ever quite going to happen, but we might see it redefined in the next like 10, 15 years.
There is a good joke about this one. There was like, all right, guys, AI is going to replace us. All clients have to do, they have to give us the clear instructions what they want. And then the second one, like, okay, actually we're safe. They never do that.
One of my new quotes I like to say as well is AI won't replace your job, but someone saying that someone who knows AI replacing your job will definitely not replace your job. Because we got all this new generation of people saying AI is the best, it's going to do all this stuff. I'm like, you're not a threat because you just talk about it, you don't do it. So, yeah.
No, definitely. Yeah, AI is just kind of a tool. This is what people mainly kind of, all this hype made that AI is like our replacement. It's just a tool like anything else. Back in time, like if you go like 50 years ago and show them Revit, they're also going to like freak out. They're like, oh my God, they're going to take over our jobs. No, it just creates new jobs. You just don't understand it.
Just made more work.
Because back in time, there were like jobs that you would find hilarious. There was a person who would just wake up in the morning and go and light candles in all the light posts. This was an actual job. Then when electricity comes, and all these guys think like, oh, they take our jobs. It's just going to be a new job. Now you're going to service these light bulbs once in a while or something.
Yeah, they became the light bulb repair shop instead. Yeah. But I guess the other thing too I see is like, I mean, I see the excitement about AI is a reflection of how frustrated everyone is with the state of technology in our industry. In that people are getting quite sick of Revit being like one of the only viable solutions for delivering the way that we deliver in architecture right now. If you want to use a different platform, you have to sort of change how you work, I think. Like if you want to use BlenderBIM, like it's a whole different process to using Revit. There's going to be challenges and differences, and you've got to learn how Git works at the company level. So I think that's part of it. Like people are just so tired of the same thing and they're like, oh, this thing promises to take it all away, right? So that's sort of why the hype train is going so fast at the moment, because I think people are really hoping this is going to be like the next big thing. And I mean, I don't know if it's going to be in our industry. It's definitely going to be in some industries, but like I don't know if it's going to...
Oh yeah, there is certain industries already at risk. Like call centers, oh, they're screwed. That's for sure. Because AI is definitely better at that one. But something like Revit, I don't know. AEC is so slow to changes. This is why Revit is so dominant. Like there are tools that are arguably better than Revit, but it's so hard to find people who know the tool. It's so hard in case you have this kind of tricky questions. There are no forums like which go 10 years back who had this issue, and this is why Revit's so dominant. It's like the community, the forums, and just the presence. And just that all the companies AEC, they're so slow to react. Changing from Revit to anything else, oh my God, people
I think part of
still
it is
not.
ego as well. I mean, there's a lot of BIM managers out there who have invested very heavily in Revit, but not only that, they've convinced their companies to invest heavily in Revit. So if you pull the carpet out from under their feet and pull them off somewhere else, they're going to go, wait, why did we spend the last 25 years building all those families? So there's this like
Yep.
sort of pain point where it's like, how easy is it to just pull away from this thing that has become like the lifeblood of your company's delivery model? So I think that's a really interesting point the industry is going to find itself stuck in. And the only way out is going to be through it. A very difficult solution to just pick up a whole new platform. I think it depends on the way the company works. Like, for example, TestFit. If a company just does residential buildings, like, my God, get on TestFit. Because that thing will just completely change the first 40% of your delivery process into like a day. But don't tell the client, right? You charge for the product, not the service. So and that's where the service orientated business model is going to be the transformative component here. If we keep delivering on hourly rates as an industry, like, we're encouraged to do more, to charge more. But if we make our service, our product, a product out of our service instead, and we sort of no longer just make it how many hours are we spending on this, at least on the surface, behind the scenes, we still resource, we still do that. That might give us the opportunity to change the delivery process, which will let different platforms shine. So that's where I hope to see our industry move. And maybe AI might help with some of those pain points by making the administration side of the industry a bit more fluid, a bit easier to interact with, and not so rigid and sterile. So maybe that might be a force multiplier for change if we see it go. But yeah, that it does feel like it's still a very long way away. Like, it feels like it's out of reach still. It's like we can reach for it, but I still
Yeah,
can't
surprisingly.
can't grasp it. Yeah. And in the meantime, we can keep building cool tools, I guess.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
No, I have huge hopes in BlenderBIM, but I understand that the company is going to be so resistant to change. But I think the heavy price tag of Revit sooner or later gonna finally, like, the BlenderBIM gonna catch up. Because Revit is like 3,500 like a year for user, and once you have, like, I don't know, team of 20, that's already substantial amount. You're like, okay, maybe I spend the same money in training.
Yeah.
The problem is, like, it's just not widely accepted yet. There
It's
are
a
not
bit
as
of,
many use cases. It's
yeah.
crazy what some people do in Blender with even BlenderBIM.
It's a bit of both. I mean, I guess, like, if you look at Blender, that's obviously a really unique example because the platform in itself is free. A lot of the other, like, competing platforms in the market, like, hey, you cut. Very cute. You like TestFit and these sort of platforms, they're not cheap. Like, they still charge a pretty hefty subscription. So, like, it's not like 10% of Revit, it's maybe like half of Revit if you're lucky for those new platforms. So you can only really replace Revit with like two platforms when it comes to cost, I think, in a business. And no platform does even half of what Revit does for most companies at the moment. They pick up very small parts of the design process. Like, most of them are
Yeah,
feasibility applications, and I'm like, not another feasibility app. It's like there's so many of them. And I think, like, until something can take on the delivery side of Revit, or like producing drawings, printing drawings, that really basic stuff, vector graphics, that's what it's going to take to break free of Revit, because for now our governments are still demanding that we give them drawings in PDF produced to graphical drafting standards. And BlenderBIM does seem to be exploring that space. How can you generate a drawing from the model? It's got a long way to go, but, like, it's amazing how far they've come. And I know Dion relatively well. He's in Australia as well. Dion Molt, who manages the
Oh, really?
the Bonsai project, working for Lendlease, and he's a really interesting person with a lot of passion, both in a positive for the industry and a negative against Revit sort of sense. So, it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like, in marketing, they say you cannot be like 10% better to replace something. You have to be nearly 200% better to just, like,
Yeah.
because people, like, yeah, it's better, but why change?
Yeah, I think there are some platforms where, like, they're challenging the delivery model. One that I've got my eye on and I've been having a play with is called Acrol, and they're sort of like occupying a similar space to what, like, apps like Forma and other apps occupy, where you're doing your blocking, your stacking, your areas, your yields. But they've taken it from a very interesting direction. They're looking at it more as a a craft in developing your application. So the user experience is like so fluid, so friendly. You've got sheets with views on there that change dynamically, and you've got labels, sort of like parameters for families on sheets that respond to changes in the model, and it's much more fluid and sort of feels like using Miro board mixed with Rhino. So I think some of those applications are going to like actually hopefully tilt some firms, or maybe some firms might find they only want to do part of the design process and then hand it off to another firm or an outsourcer. Like you might just do the design stage and that's it, you're done, hand it off in design development to a firm that still uses Revit. So some firms might find different niches that they can specialize in versus doing everything and anything. And I think they'll find they can probably reduce their employee count as well if they do that. Like if firms just do the design stage, they might be able to cut 90% of their workforce out and still deliver like, maybe 50% of the work. So that's where maybe the future might change for some firms. Yeah.
You mentioned the Acrol. There's also this trend going a little bit more web browser, cloud-based applications. What I like about Acrol, it's following the trend. There's like, do you know Figma?
Yeah. So they're very much inspired by
Figma. I
Figma.
just like interface. Once I saw that, I'm like, oh, that's probably going to be huge if they put enough effort because this kind of trend for the Figma. I use Framer, which is pretty much Figma for building websites really quick. This is like if you're a designer, but you don't want to mess with the code, that's perfect. And like this Acrol, I like when companies move in this direction of the trends because they clearly work. It's just the AEC is a little bit slow to these changes and they might not appreciate it. But I know like similar apps from other industries, so I appreciate this part. I haven't tried it.
I think one of their main investors in the startup mode was actually the CEO of Figma. So they definitely are very closely aligned with that mentality. And you can feel it when you use the app. It just feels like everything's been designed very intentionally and very cleanly. Like everything's out of the way until you need it. It's not just like the interfaces where there's like 50 buttons and you just got to find the one you need. It's a very different approach. And I think web-based is obviously fantastic when it comes to deployment as well. Like, just open up a web browser, you're installed like straight away. That's obviously like a huge benefit as well.
Yeah, it's also updating is no issue. It's just done in background. You close, you come next day, new version, done.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we've got so used to the idea of no backwards compatibility with Revit that we've sort of forgotten what modern application development looks like. Like it's just so strange to be in that scenario. Like when you go to Rhino and Rhino 6 can open a Rhino 8 file, it's like, what? Like, cool, okay, wow, because they've like planned ahead and they've figured out their Delta process for like new features and they've figured out how to flag the new features in their format that they write. Like Unreal, when you use Unreal Editor, it's a whole different program experience. Like the interface is so much cleaner. So yeah, I think hopefully people will just try these apps out and maybe get either frustrated enough to make Revit change or make the change, I guess, if they find a way out. Yeah.
I think the issue is the legacy code because I heard we had an issue with the rooms and one of the colleagues reached out to Autodesk team, talk back and forth a lot. And eventually we got an answer that the algorithm that controls how rooms are taken, it was written in the 90s and they are a little bit, either they're afraid to touch it or they just don't want to because it takes a lot of effort to rewrite it from scratch. And therefore there's certain bugs. Yeah. We found a workaround that usually like draw lines, this and that, move things. But it was funny to hear that they also can admit that there is legacy code that they're not willing to touch at the moment because there's just, they don't have resources or not.
Oh, fair enough too. I mean, it's a huge product. I look at my code base for my add-in and I can't imagine what it must be like to work on like a Revit in source. That would be insane. So like my heart goes out to the developers that are like having to maintain this beast and also add new features into the API and rewrite parts of a very old program. I have major respect for the development team at Autodesk, and I think like even they're in a point where Autodesk is like, wow, we've got a lot of tech debt here. We just got to manage what we can. So like, whilst I don't agree with everything Autodesk and the team's done in the past, I admire that they've managed to keep this thing running in a modern developer ecosystem the way they have, and making the jump to net core in 2025. That would have been an insane amount of work behind the scenes for them. Dark mode, even if it's not perfect, I mean, there would have been so much work to just go back to all those forms and find all the variables they need to suddenly insert and control and the bindings they would have had to make. I don't know how they do it with the amount of people they have, but mad respect to them. But yeah, I wouldn't want to change the stair tool or the railing tool. My gosh, imagine that.
Yeah, see. Right, I think we can wrap it up. It's
Sure.
already past the 2 hour mark.
Well,
Can you just share what you're up to, where people can reach out to you? Just kind of.
yeah. So I guess I mean, in my 9 to 5, I'm working. So if I don't always get back to people during that time, that's probably why. But these days, I've just come back to YouTube on my channel, the Aussie BIM Guru. So I'm actually teaching C# at the moment. I think we're up to lesson 2 out of probably like 300 at the moment. But I'm starting with the absolute fundamentals. So like on Monday, I taught people about variables, very basic stuff. And we're just going to build up step by step until we're finally developing a Revit add-in. And I'm more or less going to share how to build roughly the toolbar that I've already shared on GitHub. So if you want like to get ahead of me, like just look at my toolbar on GitHub and see if you can figure it out. But my goal is to get people pretty much to the point that I'm at, because I feel like it's a skill set that people deserve to have available to them, especially given it's C# programming's been around for a long time. It's just been hard to access. So I'm trying to create a series that I guess, even the, probably the Python beginners could probably pick up and have a look at and figure out if it's for them. But at the same time, I guess I'm probably hopefully going to get back to like Python and pyRevit eventually. I do have like another toolbar that I was playing with for a while that I wanted to sort of expand a little bit. So I think it's still like a really valuable Guru. Yeah, so I was just playing around with that, but I stopped after I got about probably like 12 tools in there. But I think I might be able to get a few more in there and clean it up a little bit. And I guess like personally, I'm actually just trying to teach myself more about WPF and model view model at the moment. So creating modeless forms to run whilst Revit's running as well. And I've just built my first MVVM form the other day, so that was pretty cool. So that'll be like probably the next few weeks for me.
How do you find MVVM concept?
I think it's.
I mean, like MVVM against like behind code.
Yeah, I like compared to like MVC or like other types of approaches. I mean, I find it's a fairly intuitive concept once you understand how they work together. It took me a while to figure out like, okay, like what points to what and what controls what. Bindings obviously were like the key to make it work. So getting my head around bindings and converting objects, that was probably like the hard part. But I think it more or less makes sense to me now. Obviously building really complex forms is like always going to take time, so that's what I'm finding the challenge is. If I want to create a really flexible form, it's a lot of code to get it to work, but I guess once it does work, it's like super rewarding. But I guess from there, like I'll probably just at work be trying to focus on just scaling up both my toolbar, but trying to find ways to empower, I guess, the people I work with in other platforms like Rhino, and trying to introduce other programs to the company like Acrol to see if there's like opportunities to try out different platforms and approaches. So that's sort of like my roadmap in the short term. And I guess if people want to reach out to me, probably the easiest ways is obviously in the comments of my YouTube videos if you have questions. You can contact me on LinkedIn through direct message, or just respond to a comment if you like what I say or don't like what I say. I'm always happy to have a debate. I actually spend a lot of my time on LinkedIn debating people because I find it's fun to see how people think and react. And I think it's good for people to defend their opinions. So I like to sometimes put people on the spot and say, yeah, okay, I don't agree. Let's talk about it. So if I ever do argue with anyone here in the comments, don't worry. I don't hate you. I'm interested in what you're talking about and I want to talk more about it. And probably the last way you can contact me is aussiebimguru@gmail.com. So that's my standard email in my YouTube closing screen. So yeah, don't be a stranger. And if you're struggling with something, just reach out. I'm happy to give you tips. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you for coming on the show. This was really exciting. I definitely wanted to invite you, one of the first guests, but you invited yourself before I had an opportunity. I love that. I'm an introvert, so this helped me a lot.
Yeah, no, it's a real privilege to be on there. And I really respect what you're doing in building an API community and giving, I guess, a secondary community for pyRevit users as well. I think it's a really exciting way to bring the two learning spaces together, and I highly recommend anyone watching who's not checking out Eric's platform to go and have a look. It gets my endorsement. It's a very clean, well set up platform. Your videos are very to the point. Like my videos, I don't get to the point. I talk for a long time and it takes me a long time to explain my concepts, but I mean, Eric, you put a lot of work into your editing and your graphics, and I really admire the effort you put in, and it shows. So yeah, check it out.
Thank you. think the biggest difference is because you're a native speaker. When I watch your videos, I'm so jealous because you can just turn on the camera and talk for hours.
Yeah.
I still have this a bit camera shy or something.
Oh, that's okay.
And I need to plan more. And usually when I watch my videos, I just cannot post it. I just cringe a little. I need to add a little bit of editing. And so now it gets better. In the beginning, it was like I would spend sometimes 20 hours editing a video to get 200 views. It was just insane. Like now I think I should have just like posted videos like and ignore how bad it was. I would learn faster,
It's all
but
part of the journey.
yeah, I think
I mean, honestly, your English is perfect. I think you've come a long way. Like I remember when you first jumped on YouTube, and I'm like, oh, he's getting the hang of it, and now you're a pro, mate. You're a pro.
thank you. Oh, I made a full-time job out of it.
You've done so well. So yeah, be proud of yourself. Yeah, yeah,
Thank you. Appreciate this.
yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you for watching and have a good day, I guess. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.